Unit 6 focuses on the tension between conformity and individuality in post-World War II American writing. For the first half of this unit, let's look at short fiction, in particular John Cheever's The Swimmer and John Updike's Separating. For background to this era, you should also read the introduction to Volume E. The short story enjoys a resurgence in this period. Accompanying the popularity of television was a decline in the sale of magazines, which is the main conduit for short fiction. But after World War II, short story collections began appearing again on bestseller lists. A rise in academic literary journals, for example, the Sewanee Review, Kenyon Review, and Southern Review, along with mass market magazines such as The New Yorker, Esquire, and Harper's, helped bring about the change. And even today, those are the venues in which you can find good contemporary American short story. Cheever and Updike are two of the most influential fiction writers of the 20th century. Both began their careers in the context of post-World War II America, an era of economic growth and stability, and also of social conformity. Cheever and Updike are known for their portrayals of upper-middle-class suburban life. Cheever's The Swimmer seems a rather simple story. The main character, having had a bit too much to drink, sets out to swim his way home. He can do this because the majority of those living in his very affluent neighborhood have swimming pools which create a type of man-made river, and he names this river after his wife, Lucinda. His plan is presented to us as a modern-day quest. Like Ulysses, he's going home, where he will be welcomed by his family, in this case, 4 daughters and a wife. But Nettie Merrill isn't an epic hero, or at least he doesn't seem to be. He's merely an upper middle class, middle-aged guy, despite his childish nickname and juvenile behavior, who sets out on a whim on a midsummer Sunday, which we're told isn't a holy day. The realistic details are undercut by the last paragraph on page 158. Here, Cheever offers a clue that Nettie lives in an imaginary or nostalgic world. Let's return to Nettie's quest. At first, all goes well and he is welcomed by his community. At the first house, owned by the Grahams, he is offered a drink. At the next 5 houses, he is also warmly greeted and nourished. But there's a shift at the 6th house where the Bunkers are throwing a party. He seems to be an outsider to the party goers. And we get details that suggest that Nettie is confused. His wife, for example, had told them that they couldn't come, and yet Nettie doesn't seem to remember this. This is the first potential challenge on Nettie's quest, because these party goers threaten what we come to understand are delusions of happiness and security on Nettie's part. There's a shift in the story after he leaves the Bunkers party. The next house he comes to is empty. They've left, signaling that the party is over, the good times are gone, and Nettie is incredibly thirsty. The weather is also changing. We're told it would storm, and by page 160, Nettie has become simply Ned. There are other signs of seasonal change, and remember, this is supposed to be just one day. He sees a maple tree stripped of leaves and other signs of decay. For example, a riding track is overgrown. People have moved on, but he can't remember that they've moved on. And then he comes across a dry pool. The illusion is falling apart, although Ned tries to dismiss these signs away. Then the next dramatic shift is marked by a geographical space. The busy road he has to cross that leads to the public swimming pool, which is chlorinated, crowded, and patrolled by lifeguards who question his right to even be there. He is no longer protected by the affluence of those like the Westerhazys, in whose pool he had begun his journey. These darker experiences are accompanied by more signs of forgetfulness, time passing, and seasonal changes. In the last part of his journey, Ned is no longer welcomed. The Biswangers call him a gatecrasher, and suggests that Ned is no longer financially or socially secure. Even his former mistress, Shirley Adams, has moved on. She has a new, younger lover. Critical of his quest, she asks him, "Will you ever grow up?" And she won't give him a drink. And Ned has, without realizing it, he's grown up. In the description on page 164, we see that he is weaker because of age. The description is, Ned tried to haul himself up onto the curb, but found that the strength in his arms and shoulders had gone. By the end, he is old, tired, and we realize he is impoverished. There is no home to go to. His wife has left, as have his daughters, and he seems to have gone bankrupt. The lighthearted adventure Cheever presents at the beginning has become a serious cautionary tale for the post-World War II generation about living mindfully. Ned has just let his life go by without paying attention to it. John Updike's Separating offers a setting similar to the one featured in Cheever's The Swimmer. This is the world of upper middle class affluence, a world of acquiring tans, cocktails, lobster, champagne, tennis, and swimming. This is a world of leisure. There's home improvement, tickets for concerts, and study abroad. In material terms, this family has achieved the American dream. Against this setting, however, Updike presents what seems at first to be a fairly conventional story about middle-class trouble. In this case, a divorce is on the horizon. The story begins in medias res and calls attention to the conflict. The first sentence is, "All that June, the weather had mocked the maples' internal misery with solid sunlight." But we never really learn what events and actions precipitated Joan and Richard's decision to divorce. We learn toward the end of the story, when Richard is driving to pick up his son, that Richard has a mistress whom he plans to marry. He has hinted at this earlier in the story in the after-dinner conversation he has with Joan when he says about the children, "They never questioned the reasons we gave for our separation, no thought of a third person." This detail is typical of the story. It gives us a glimpse at the reasons for divorce without ever explaining them to us, without ever giving us a larger picture. We never, for example, witness what exactly has gone wrong between Richard and Joan. In fact, they still function pretty well as a couple. They sleep in the same bed, which I think is kind of a big surprise. They are also comfortable and seem to enjoy talking to each other about their children, and they joke with one another. And neither Joan or Richard seem to have made any long-term plans regarding what will happen after the separation, despite the expectation Richard reveals about possibly marrying his mistress. To the children and to each other, there remains the possibility of reconciliation. Margaret, their eldest, highlights the two possible outcomes of the situation when she tells them, "I think it's silly. You should either live together or get divorced." At one point in the story, Richard, who was the one to propose the separation, tells us that he does not feel separated on some level. Indeed, when opening up to the children, Richard is the one who starts to cry, and not Joan. Critics have noticed that the female characters in the story respond much better to the news of separation than the male characters. Within the present-day time of the story, Joan is calm and seemingly dispassionate. We know, however, that she cares and had already, quote, cried too much all spring, unquote. We're also told that, quote, the girls took it pretty calmly, but that John, the younger son, flipped out. And while Dickie, the older son, at first seems to accept his parents' decision, this is quickly followed by his emotional breakdown. The emotional responses of the male characters add tension to the narrative and leads to Dickie's final question, why? Which is emphasized by that odd kiss between father and son. The last child to be told, Richard Jr., is tired and his defenses are down, and ostensibly when he asks why, he is asking why his parents are separating. But that last paragraph suggests a larger question. The obvious answer to Richard Jr.'s why is that Richard loves and wants to marry another woman. But we are told in the last lines that even Richard had forgotten why. He is separating from his wife and family. Richard and Joan seem to be on a path they can't diverge from. Earlier he writes, Updike writes, each moment was a partition, with the part on one side and the future, with the past on one side and the future on the other. Updike here moves this from a story about two individuals to a social issue. Divorce has become, like the series of household tasks that Richard has to complete by the end of summer, just routine. Divorce is something we as a society do without much reflection. We've become undone by ordinary routine. Highlighting this interpretation draws out connections between Updike's and Cheever's stories.